The heat in Arizona that afternoon was a physical presence. It wasn't just hot, it was heavy. The air tasted of dust and baked asphalt, and the sun hammered down with a kind of personal malice. I was on my porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace, watching the heat shimmer off the road, when I saw them. Two figures walking up my driveway with the slow, deliberate pace of men on a mission they didn't want. One was Mr. Gable, the head of our Homeowners Association's aesthetic committee. He was dressed in a crisp, pressed polo shirt and khaki pants, an outfit that seemed to defy the 110-degree weather. The man beside him, sweating through his uniform, was an inspector from the county's fire department. His face was a mask of professional discomfort. I knew right away this wasn't a social call. Gable didn't bother with pleasantries. He gestured towards the small, hand-painted wooden box on my porch. It was a little free library my daughter had built with me years ago, before she went off to college. It was her parting gift to the neighborhood. "Frank," Gable said, his voice as dry as the desert air, "we have a problem." He started taking pictures with his phone, the clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. The fire inspector cleared his throat. "Sir," he began, looking at a spot just over my shoulder, "your structure is blocking access to a fire hydrant." I followed his gaze. The fire hydrant was a good 15 feet away, sitting proudly on the edge of the public sidewalk, nowhere near my porch. You could park a truck between my library and that hydrant. This whole thing felt like it was straight out of a video. And if you're watching Karenology, you probably know the script better than I do. It never starts with an earthquake. It starts with something small, something so absurd you almost laugh. Almost. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, letting him finish his performance. Gable walked up to the library, a smug little smile playing on his lips, and slapped a plastic sleeve notice onto the tiny glass door. The cheap plastic crackled in the heat. "You have 24 hours to remove it," he announced, "and there's a $1,000 fine for the violation." He then delivered the line he'd clearly been practicing. "The rules of fire safety are written in blood, Frank. We wouldn't want your story to be the next chapter." Have you ever heard something so dramatic it loops right back around to being pathetic? That was the moment. The inspector had the decency to look embarrassed. He just wanted to get back to his air-conditioned truck. I felt a familiar cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a tired sort of recognition. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the last 30 of them in cybersecurity, not the flashy stuff you see in movies. I do audits, risk assessment, digital forensics. My job is to stare at chaos and find the one broken line of code, the one lie hidden in a million truths. I've seen this pattern before. Men like Gable don't use power. They get high on the illusion of it. If you've ever dealt with a person who thinks their petty authority is the same as the law of the land, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you do, maybe hit that like button so I know I'm not alone here. As they turned to leave, their shoes crunching on the gravel, my eyes drifted to my office window. I could see my desk, and on it, a coiled length of old Ethernet cable. The connectors were hand-crimped, the plastic yellowed with age. My first mentor gave it to me. He said, "The truth always travels through a wire, Frank. You just have to know which one to plug in." It was my personal symbol, a reminder that underneath all the noise and nonsense, there are hard, verifiable facts. I watched them walk away, their figures shrinking in the oppressive heat. Gable was pointing things out to the inspector, probably planning his next crusade against an unapproved garden gnome or a rogue wind chime. I waited until their car pulled away before I stepped back inside, the cool air of the house a welcome shock. I picked up the violation notice. The paper was already warm, $1,000, 24 hours. It was an impossible demand designed to force immediate compliance. But as I scanned the document, my professional instincts kicked in. The inspector's signature was a hasty, barely legible scrawl. Below it, his name and badge number were printed. I sat down at my desk, the old Ethernet cable cool against my wrist. Gable wanted a war over rules. Fine. But he was bringing a rulebook to a data fight. He had no idea what kind of game we were about to play. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim room, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I started to type. I didn't type a complaint. I didn't search for a lawyer. I typed the fire inspector's name into a deep search engine. The first thread was in my hand. It was time to pull. The digital breadcrumbs on the inspector led exactly where I expected. Nowhere. The guy was clean, overworked, new to the county, and probably just wanted to finish his shift. Gable had likely cornered him, spewed a bunch of official-sounding nonsense from the Homeowners Association bylaws, and the inspector just signed the paper to make the problem go away. It was a classic case of bureaucratic fatigue being weaponized. So, I couldn't attack the man. I had to attack the lie. The next morning, I went out with a tape measure. The sun was already starting its daily assault. I laid the bright yellow tape from the base of the hydrant to the edge of my porch library, 15 feet, 4 inches. I took a photo, the numbers sharp and undeniable. Then I took another wider shot showing the vast empty space around the hydrant. I uploaded both images to our official community web forum. I didn't add any snarky comments, just the facts. Per the notice I received, here is the location of the little free library in relation to the hydrant. Distance, 15 feet, 4 inches. I thought that would be the end of it. Logic, right? Evidence. Have you ever been so sure of the facts that you couldn't imagine any other outcome? That was me, naive, I know. I went to make coffee feeling a small sense of victory. Then my phone buzzed, and again, and again. For the next hour, it didn't stop. My post was under siege, a flood of comments, almost all from new accounts with no profile pictures and generic names. John S. 82, Patriot Mom, Concerned Neighbor 11. They ignored the photos completely. The attacks were personal. Why would you argue with a fire professional? One wrote. Another added, my kids play on this street. I'd rather have them safe than have your pile of old books. The smell of my coffee turned bitter in the air. It was a classic bot attack, but sloppy, a distributed denial of truth. I made my second mistake of the day. I tried to engage. I replied to one, pointing out the 15-foot distance. A dozen more anonymous replies buried me instantly. He thinks his tape measure is more important than our safety. They twisted my logic, turning my calm appeal to facts into proof of arrogance. The digital mob had its pitchforks out, and the air was thick with the scent of burning pixels. Then it got worse. One comment hit a nerve, a cold, sharp jab right into an old wound. I heard he lost his last corporate job for cutting corners on security. Figures he'd do the same with fire safety. That was a lie, but it was a well-crafted one, close enough to a painful truth to make my hands go cold. I felt my pulse thrumming in my neck, a frantic, trapped bird. I'd spent my entire career building a reputation for meticulous, almost obsessive integrity after a layoff that was spun to look like my fault. And here, in a stupid neighborhood forum, it was being dismantled by ghosts. I spent the next few hours in a furious, useless battle, typing replies, deleting them, trying to find the right combination of words to fight a tidal wave of bad faith. The logical part of my brain knew it was pointless, but the part of me that felt the sting of injustice couldn't let go. You ever get that feeling? Like you're wrestling with smoke? Just as I was about to throw my phone against the wall, an email popped up. The subject line made my stomach drop. It was from a major freelance client, a tech firm that accounted for a good chunk of my income. Frank, it read, we've noticed some concerning public-facing activity associated with your name online. We need to pause our current contract pending a review of the potential reputational risks. The screen blurred for a second. The hum of the air conditioner sounded like a distant roar. This wasn't about a $1,000 fine anymore. This was my livelihood. Gable wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase me. The fine was the bait. The public shaming was the trap, and I had walked right into it. As I sat there, the weight of it all pressing down, another notification chimed. This one wasn't a comment. It was a private message on the forum from a user I didn't recognize, a kid named Ben. Mr. Chen, it began, using my last name. I handle some of the IT for the Homeowners Association's website on the side. Those accounts attacking you, they aren't real. Their IP signatures are all masked through the same private proxy. It's a single source. Be careful. I stared at the message, the words glowing in the gathering dusk of my office. A single source. It wasn't a mob. It was one person with a loudspeaker, pretending to be a crowd. The game had just changed. The air in the room suddenly felt electric, charged with a new, dangerous kind of possibility. My war wasn't with the neighborhood. It was with a ghost in the machine. And my phone, which had been an instrument of my torture all day, now felt different in my hand. It felt like a weapon. Ben's message was the bucket of cold water I needed. The fury that had been clouding my judgment receded, replaced by a familiar, sharp focus. the kind I get when I'm deep in a system, hunting for a vulnerability. This wasn't a social problem anymore. It was a network problem, and that was my home turf. I spent the next 2 days mostly in my office, the blinds drawn against the relentless Arizona sun. The room was a cool, dark cave, lit only by the glow of 3 monitors. My home wasn't just my sanctuary, it was my command center. I started by tracing the proxy Ben had mentioned. It was a cheap offshore service designed for amateur scammers. Amateur was the key word. Pros don't leave patterns. This guy did. Following the digital breadcrumbs, I used some of my old OSINT, open source intelligence tricks. It's amazing what people leave lying around on the internet. I started cross-referencing timestamps from the forum posts with public social media activity in our town. I was looking for a digital shadow, a ripple in the data that corresponded with the attacks. It was slow, tedious work. I felt like a jeweler, examining thousands of identical grains of sand for a single fleck of gold. The air in my office grew stale, smelling of old coffee and ozone from the humming electronics. But late on the second night, I found it. A geotagged photo from a local restaurant, posted by Gable's wife on Instagram. The timestamp was within seconds of a particularly vicious comment on the forum. A coincidence? Maybe. But then I found another one, and another. 6 posts, 6 near-perfect matches. Gable wasn't just the source, he was sloppy. But this wasn't enough. It was circumstantial. I needed something solid, something that couldn't be explained away. And that's when I remembered something else from my initial background check on Gable, a small, buried detail. He was a partner in a local real estate agency. Desert Bloom Properties. It seemed innocuous. Lots of people in our community were in real estate. I switched gears, pulling up public business filings. Desert Bloom Properties had recently taken out a substantial loan from a mid-sized regional bank, Pacific Trust. The loan document was public record, but the details were redacted. All I could see was the loan number and the date. But a loan for what? The company's portfolio showed they specialized in flipping single-family homes. They weren't big developers. So, why the massive line of credit? My mind was racing. The book library, the fire hydrant, the bot attack, the lost contract, and now a real estate agency with a mysterious loan. These weren't separate events, they were connected. Have you ever had that feeling when disparate facts suddenly click into place like magnets? It's a rush, a jolt of pure clarity. The answer was on the County Planning and Zoning website. I dug into the archives, looking for applications connected to Desert Bloom, and there it was. Not a recent application, but a withdrawn one from 3 years ago. A proposal to rezone a block of 10 residential lots, our block, for high-density commercial use. The proposal was withdrawn after failing to get the required homeowner consent. The project lead listed on the application, Mr. Gable. It all made sense. He wasn't trying to enforce rules. He was trying to drive people out. The library was just a pretext. He was manufacturing violations, creating a hostile environment, hoping to devalue the properties or frustrate the owners enough to sell. He was picking us off one by one, so he could buy our homes cheap and resurrect his failed development deal. The book library wasn't a fire hazard. It was an obstacle to his personal gold mine. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just a petty tyrant on a power trip. This was a calculated long-term scheme worth millions. And I was standing right in the middle of his blast radius. That night, a new notice appeared on my door. It wasn't from the Homeowners Association. It was a formal notice of inspection from the county. The aesthetic committee had filed a complaint, alleging that my entire property violated multiple codes: overgrown shrubs, a crack in the driveway, and, my personal favorite, improperly maintained exterior lighting. It was a declaration of total war. At the bottom of the list was a new item. An unscheduled fire safety and systems check for the whole neighborhood was being called. Mandatory attendance. The meeting was in 3 days at the community hall. Gable was escalating. He was moving from digital attacks to using the full weight of county bureaucracy against me. He was going to try to humiliate me publicly, using the fire system inspection as his stage. I looked from the notice back to my screen, where the rezoning application glowed. He thought he was closing the net. He had no idea I was about to set it on fire. The day of the community meeting arrived with the same oppressive heat, but now there was a different kind of pressure in the air. The community hall was packed. It felt less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a public trial, and I was the one in the defendant's box. I saw neighbors who used to wave at me now looking away, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Gable had painted me as a reckless outsider, and the picture was sticking. Gable stood at the front, next to a different fire official. This one looked older, more authoritative. He had a microphone and the self-satisfied air of a man who owned the stage. He started with a long, rambling speech about community standards and the importance of safety. He talked about rules being the threads that hold the fabric of our society together. It was a masterpiece of empty rhetoric. I could feel the sweat trickle down my back, and it wasn't just from the heat. Then came the main event. As part of our commitment to safety, Gable announced, his voice booming through the cheap speakers, we'll be conducting a live demonstration of our new, upgraded fire alarm system. He gestured to a technician. It was Ben, the kid from the forum, looking pale and nervous. He avoided my eyes. We'll test the smoke detector right here in the hall to show everyone how effectively our systems work. The fire official nodded gravely. Ben climbed a small stepladder and held a can of aerosol smoke spray up to a brand new detector mounted on the ceiling. It was positioned directly over the section where I was sitting, a subtle but clear piece of stagecraft. Everyone was watching me. Ben sprayed the test smoke. A thick white cloud enveloped the detector. And then, nothing. An awkward silence filled the hall. The piercing shriek of the alarm never came. The little red light on the unit didn't even blink. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. You could hear someone's baby start to fuss in the back of the room. Gable feigned shock. He looked from the silent detector to the fire official. Then his eyes landed on me, and he let them linger just long enough for everyone to follow his gaze. Well, that's unexpected, he said, his voice laced with false concern. This is a brand new unit. I can't imagine why it would fail. But his expression said he could imagine it perfectly. He was planting a seed, sabotage, and I was the obvious suspect. Have you ever been framed so perfectly that even you start to question reality for a second? My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to tell them this was a setup, but I knew how it would look. Hysterical, guilty. The crowd was murmuring, side eyes and whispers turning into a low hum of judgment. The air, which had been merely hot, now felt suffocating, thick with their collective distrust. I looked at Ben, who was fumbling with the detector, his hands shaking slightly. He wouldn't look at me. He knew. He had to know this was wrong. But he was just a kid, caught between a part-time job and a powerful man. I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly swamped by a feeling of profound isolation. Later that evening, after the disastrous meeting, I was sitting in my dark office when an anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject, no signature, just a single attached file, system log TXT. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. It was a raw data log from the fire alarm system's control panel, a long string of timestamps and event codes. And there, buried in the noise, was one line that stood out. 2025, October 22nd, 1903 and 14 seconds. Device ID 7B4. Status, deactivated. User, Gable, admin. My breath caught in my throat. It was from Ben. The timestamp was 2 minutes before the demonstration. The detector hadn't failed. It had been remotely disabled, and the log showed exactly who did it. Gable, using his administrator account. It was the digital smoking gun. But what could I do with it? If I revealed the log, Ben would be implicated. He'd lose his job, and Gable would paint him as a disgruntled kid I'd manipulated. The log itself, coming from an anonymous source, would be dismissed as a fabrication, a forgery, another desperate act from the neighborhood pariah. It was a perfect piece of evidence that was utterly useless to me. Just then, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. Mr. Chen, this is Officer Miller with the County Sheriff's Office. We need to speak with you regarding a complaint filed by Mr. Gable. He's alleging harassment and a possible cybercrime. I stared at the screen, the words glowing with menace. The walls were closing in, faster than I could have imagined. Gable wasn't just setting me up for social ruin. He was bringing in the law. He had twisted my research, my attempts to find the truth, into a weapon to be used against me. The trap wasn't just sprung, it was steel-jawed and closing tight. I felt a cold dread wash over me, the kind that whispers that the fight is already over, and you've already lost. The police visit was short and brutally efficient. Officer Miller was professional, almost sympathetic, but his questions were sharp. Gable had filed a formal complaint, complete with network logs that he claimed showed a malicious and sustained digital attack originating from my IP address. My legitimate OSINT research, the same kind of work I was paid to do, had been expertly reframed as criminal harassment. Gable had handed them a neat little package, a story that made perfect sense if you didn't know the context. The angry neighbor lashing out digitally after being cited for a violation. It was clean, simple, and completely false. I explained my side of the story, but without revealing Ben's log, my claims of a conspiracy sounded like the paranoid rantings of a man under pressure. You ever try to explain a complex truth to someone who's already been sold a simple lie? It's like trying to build a cathedral with sand. Miller gave me a stern warning about cyberstalking and left, leaving a formal caution notice on my table. It wasn't an arrest, but it was the next worst thing. It was a muzzle. Any further digital investigation on my part would now be seen as a direct violation of that warning. Gable had effectively cut me off from my greatest weapon, my own expertise. The next day, the Homeowners Association's online forum was a victory lap for Gable. He posted a vague but triumphant message about upholding community standards and ensuring a safe and respectful digital environment. The comments underneath were a chorus of praise. He was a hero. I was a villain who had been put in his place. The lie had won. My phone was silent, no new contracts, no messages from friends. I was an island. I spent the day in a fog of defeat, pacing my quiet house. The silence was the worst part. It was the sound of my reputation dying. I kept replaying it all in my head. The library, the bots, the disabled detector, the police. Each move Gable made was perfectly calculated. He had me checkmated from the start. In the late afternoon, I found myself just staring out the front window. I saw Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor from across the street, struggling with her trash cans. I'd known her for 20 years. She always had a kind word, always brought over a plate of tamales at Christmas. Now, she glanced at my house, her face unreadable, and hurried back inside. Even she was keeping her distance. That cut deeper than anything else. That's when I hit the wall. The exhaustion, the frustration, the sheer injustice of it all. It crested into a wave of pure, helpless rage. I walked into my office, swept a pile of papers off my desk, and slammed my fist down hard. The sound echoed in the empty house. A sharp pain shot up my arm, but it was nothing compared to the agony of impotence I felt. I was a man who solved complex problems for a living, and I couldn't even defend my own home from a petty tyrant in khaki pants. I sank into my chair, my head in my hands. The fight was gone. He'd won. I'd sell the house, take the loss, and just disappear. Move somewhere no one knew my name, somewhere there wasn't a homeowners association run by a sociopath. As I sat there in the gloom, my eyes fell on a different forum, a local community swap page. I'd been scrolling through it earlier, looking for nothing in particular, just a distraction, and there, I saw a new post from Mrs. Rodriguez. It wasn't about me, it was a complaint, buried amongst posts selling old furniture and looking for lost cats. "Is anyone else having issues with pushy real estate agents?" she'd written. "A man from Desert Bloom Properties has come to my door 3 times this month, insisting I should sell. He's offering way below market value and telling me property values are about to drop. It's starting to feel like harassment." My head snapped up. The words on the screen seemed to pulse with light. Desert Bloom Properties? Gable's company. I scrolled down. There was one reply. "Yeah, same here. A Mr. Gable." It wasn't just me. He was targeting others. And Mrs. Rodriguez, bless her stubborn heart, had just unknowingly opened a new front in this war. My despair evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear thought. I had been trying to prove Gable's digital crimes. It was the wrong battlefield. He'd locked that door, but he'd left another one wide open. I had been so focused on his attacks on me that I had missed his real objective. The true crime wasn't the fake bot attack or the disabled smoke detector. Those were just tactics. The crime was the systemic pressure campaign to steal people's homes. A new plan began to form in my mind. It was risky. It was audacious. It bordered on social engineering of the highest order. I couldn't use my technical skills as a sword anymore, but maybe, just maybe, I could use them as a shield, to set a trap. I couldn't prove what Gable had done in the past, but what if I could get him to do it again, in front of everyone? The annual neighborhood barbecue was in 2 days. It was supposed to be a celebration. For Gable, it was about to become a public execution. The plan was simple, but its execution had to be flawless. It relied on 2 things: Gable's arrogance and his obsession with control. I knew he couldn't resist an opportunity to publicly cement his victory over me. I was going to hand him that opportunity on a silver platter. First, I reached out to Mrs. Rodriguez. I went to her house, not as a suspected cyber criminal, but as a neighbor. I showed her the withdrawn rezoning application from years ago. I showed her the public records for Desert Bloom Properties. I didn't mention my own fight, the library, or the police. I framed it entirely around her problem. He's trying to scare you into selling cheap so he can bring that commercial project back, I explained. I saw the spark of understanding ignite in her eyes, followed by a fire of indignation. She was a fighter. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice firm. I told her my plan. She was hesitant at first, but the more I explained, the more a slow, determined smile spread across her face. Next, I needed to build the trap itself. I spent the next 24 hours not on a computer, but in my garage, with wood and paint. I was building a new website, but not a digital one. I built a large, professional-looking presentation board. At the top, in big, friendly letters, it read, "The Oakwood Little Library Community Support Page." Below, I created sections: Our Mission, Get Involved, and a large empty space titled Community Administrators. The final piece was a bit of digital theater. I created a simple one-page website with the same name. It was a basic donation page, a place for people to support the library, but its real purpose was hidden. The admin login page for this site was linked to the fire alarm system's backend. It was a trick I'd used in penetration testing before, a harmless-looking front door that led directly to the vault. Any password entered on that page would be checked against the fire system's admin credentials. It was a digital mousetrap, baited with the cheese of absolute control. The morning of the neighborhood barbecue arrived, bright and hot. The park was filled with families, the air smelling of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass. It was the picture of suburban harmony. I saw Gable holding court by the pavilion, laughing and shaking hands. He looked relaxed, triumphant. When he saw me walking towards him, carrying my large presentation board, his smile widened. He thought I was coming to surrender. I set up my board near the main picnic area. People started to gather, curious. I waited until I had a small crowd. Then I took a deep breath and began. "Hi everyone," I started, my voice amplified by a small portable speaker. "I know there's been a lot of discussion lately, and I've done some thinking." I looked directly at Gable. "And Mr. Gable, you were right. The rules are important. Community harmony is important. So I'm officially withdrawing my objection to the Homeowners Association's findings." A murmur went through the crowd. Gable looked stunned, then smug. He had won so completely, he didn't even have to fight the final battle. "I've realized this was never about my little bookshelf," I continued, letting the irony hang in the air. "It's about community. So I've decided to turn this into a positive. I'm creating a new community-run program for the library." I gestured to my board. "I'm even setting up a small website to help coordinate it." Then I delivered the bait. "But I can't do it alone. It needs to be managed by someone the community trusts completely, someone with a proven commitment to our neighborhood's standards." I turned to Gable, my expression one of pure, earnest supplication. "Mr. Gable, I'd be honored if you would agree to be the lead administrator for the project." The crowd applauded. It was the perfect gesture of peace. How could he refuse? Refusing would make him look petty and vindictive. Accepting would be the ultimate symbol of his authority. His ego was a fish on a line, and it was leaping for the hook. "Of course, Frank," he said, stepping forward, radiating magnanimity. "I'd be happy to help." "Great," I said, my heart hammering. "Let's get you set up right now." I pulled out my laptop and opened it to a large print version of the website, mirrored on a big TV screen I had set up. Just to make it official, you can set your own password for the site right here, in front of everyone. Total transparency. I turned the laptop towards him. On the screen was the admin login page I had built. Just enter your chosen password, and you'll have full control. He leaned over the keyboard, a triumphant glint in his eye. This was his coronation. In front of all his subjects, the rebel was kneeling and handing him the crown. He confidently typed in a password. The moment his finger hit enter, the trap sprung. The password field on the screen filled with black dots. For a half second, nothing happened. The crowd watched, expecting a welcome screen or a confirmation message. Gable stood up straighter, a king surveying his domain. Then, instead of a welcome message, the screen blinked and changed. On the big TV, a new window opened. It was the raw, ugly interface of a system log. Lines of green text on a black background. My code had worked. The moment Gable hit enter, the script I wrote didn't just try to log him into my fake website. It took the password he entered and, in the background, authenticated it against the fire alarm system's admin portal. The successful login triggered a second command. Display the activity log from the night of the community hall meeting. The crowd went silent. They didn't understand what they were looking at, not at first. It was just gibberish to them, but I did, and Gable did. I saw the color drain from his face. His confident smirk dissolved into a mask of pure panic. I took the microphone. My voice was calm, steady. You know, the funny thing about digital systems, I began, my tone conversational, is that they keep records of everything. They have perfect memories. I pointed to a single line of text I had programmed the display to highlight in bright red. Take this line, for example. I read it out loud, slowly and clearly. Timestamp, October 22nd, 2025, 1903 and 14 seconds. Event. Device ID 7B4. Status deactivated. User. Gable, admin. I let the words hang in the hot, still air. Then I turned to the crowd. For those who don't speak computer, let me translate. 2 minutes before the fire alarm demonstration failed at our last meeting, the smoke detector was manually shut off, and the system recorded who did it. A wave of understanding rippled through the crowd. Whispers turned into shocked gasps. People were pulling out their phones, recording. This was better than a viral video. This was live. But here's the really interesting part, I said, turning the knife. How do we know this log is real? How do we know I didn't fake it? I looked at Gable, whose face was now a sickly shade of gray. Well, the password you just typed into my library website a moment ago, it just logged you into the fire system. It seems you use the same password for a lot of things. It's bad security practice, Mr. Gable. Really, you should know better. That was the kill shot. The public demonstration of his password being the key was undeniable. It wasn't a document I'd found. It was an event he created himself, right here, right now. Just then, as if on cue, Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. "And that's not all he's been doing," she announced, her voice trembling but strong. "This man has been trying to bully me and other seniors on this street into selling our homes. He's been telling us our property values are dropping." Another neighbor chimed in. "He told me the same thing." And another. The dam of silence broke. A flood of accusations erupted from the crowd. Gable was surrounded, trapped by the very people he'd sought to rule. He looked around wildly, searching for an escape, but there was none. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in on him in real time. He didn't say a word. He just turned and practically fled, pushing his way through the stunned crowd, a chorus of angry shouts following him. In the end, there was no dramatic court case. There didn't need to be. Gable's scheme wasn't just illegal, it was built on his reputation. And we had just executed that reputation in the town square. The bank, on hearing of the public fraud and the collapsing development scheme, immediately pulled his credit line for Desert Bloom Properties. The Homeowners Association board, facing a full-blown insurrection, forced his resignation within 48 hours. A few days later, a small group of neighbors, led by Mrs. Rodriguez, came to my house. They helped me rebuild the little free library, bigger and better this time, right on the edge of my property for everyone to see. There was no fine. There were no more complaints. But there was a price. The freelance contract I'd lost, it never came back. The reputational risk was now a permanent part of my digital footprint. I had won the war, but the battle had left scars. I had proven I was right, but I had also proven I was difficult. In my line of work, that can be a death sentence. And then there was Ben. I never told anyone about his role. He kept his job. A few weeks later, I found a small, unmarked box on my porch. Inside was a brand new high-end network switch, a piece of equipment worth hundreds of dollars. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Sometimes, when I look at that old coiled Ethernet cable on my desk, I think about the cost of truth. It doesn't always travel through a clean, simple wire. Sometimes the wire is frayed. Sometimes it carries a charge that can burn you. I won. I saved my home and my neighborhood. But I'm not the same man who stood on his porch that first afternoon. I'm a little more tired, a little more cynical. But as I watch the neighborhood kids grab books from the library my daughter and I built, I know I'd do it all over again. Some things are worth the price. If you've ever had to pay a price for doing the right thing, let me know in the comments. I think we'd have a lot to talk about.